episode of Hidden Stories Healed Now, where we try to give others hope and to let them know everything's going to be all right. I am excited today to have Dr. Adrienne with us today, and she's going to share her story. Welcome, Dr. Adrienne.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here and contribute in any way that I can.
Well, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So why don't you share with our audience your story?
My story. I am from Tuskegee, Alabama. I was raised an only child in a strict Catholic family. Went to Florida A&M University, where I met who would become my husband, and got married at 21 years old. And to that union, 4 children were born. And after 29.5 years, I got a divorce. And so I'm a psychotherapist in the Atlanta area, and healing is what I do for a living. And so it's interesting that there were a lot of things that I did not recognize inside of my own relationship.
Let's talk about that. What were those things?
Well, first of all, I was married to someone that came from a family of divorcees. And so it does not necessarily mean that you will get a divorce, but we certainly went to the altar with 2 different concepts of what marriage was. And so one of my earliest memories is that I remember we came home and flipped the light switch on, and there were no lights on. And so he was looking at me and I was looking at him. But so coming from a single mother, his mother was the person who was always financially responsible, paid the bills. I came from a 2-parent household. And so my father was the person who did all of that. And so we never had a discussion about who would be fiscally responsible for paying bills. So there was money in an account, but neither of us knew to have a conversation about, well, you're supposed to be responsible or you're supposed to be responsible, which just evidences that we're all a product of our upbringing and our experiences. And so you do what you saw or you do something different. And so that was just the tip of the iceberg in terms of all of the things that, kind of transpired between us.
Okay. So learning these things, as you learned those differences and started moving forward, what was it that really triggered the challenges between you and your husband that said, this is something I can't do?
Interestingly enough, as a psychotherapist, I am trained to help other people. I'm trained to recognize certain things. But, how you're raised and the things that you are experiencing in terms of your thoughts and your belief system, a lot of times supersede training and education. And so what I realized is that I functioned in depression for 30 years and did not recognize it as depression because I was a rock star at work. My kids were rock stars in school, but I knew there was something toxic inside of my relationship. I just didn't know what it was. And so I can remember early on when we were dating saying to him, you are very conceited. You are very arrogant. And so because that was my reference point at 19 years old. You're not humble. You're very arrogant. You're very self-centered. That was the language that I had. But throughout the years, 20 years in, what I recognized is that what I was dealing with was narcissism. And so a lot of the manipulation, the control, and those things that I had experienced, I recognize now as a professional, this is not arrogance, this is narcissism, which is on a whole nother level damaging to a person's self-esteem and just all these different things. And so I hid what was going on from everybody, my closest friends, my parents. Nobody knew what I was dealing with. And so, I worked 3 jobs for 30 years to put everybody through college, to make sure that they had what they need. And that was primarily because I just didn't recognize what it was that I was dealing with. Because when you come from a Catholic background where divorce is not an option, that's how I was trained. That's what I was raised to believe. Divorce is not an option. And so I can remember going to my grandmother early in the marriage and, having a conversation just about some things that were going on. And her response was, if he's not putting his hands on you, you stay and pray. And so, because that was her perspective. That's how she was raised. And then, a couple of years later, a few years later, I remember going to my father and saying, he's doing this, he's doing that. And his response was, he's a man. And you took vows and you made promises to God. And so because of my faith, I took those responses from people that I respected and said, so I'm supposed to stay in this. It's going to get better. And that's literally what I thought. But the problem was I was being manipulated. And so I was sucked into every lie he told, every promise to do better. I was right there as his cheerleader saying, okay, bad things happen to good people. It's going to get better, because that's my spirit. That's who I am. And so because of that, he was able to take advantage of that for a very, very long time.
Yeah. Well, within your profession, and I think this is so prevalent to a number of people who may be facing this and not understanding the differences or understanding what it means. What is the real difference between depression and narcissism, and how did you recognize it when you say you learned later what it looked like? I mean, arrogance and narcissism. What was it that said to you through the learnings of your training, no, this is really narcissism? How do you define that?
Yeah. So I think that, the average person has a level of conceit and arrogance. When you're feeling good about yourself and you think you're looking good, you tend to carry yourself in a way where you feel confident. And sometimes it can come across as being a little arrogant, self-centered. But when we start talking about narcissism, we're talking about manipulation and control. We're talking about somebody who feels like they are above the law, that they don't have to follow any rules, and anything that happens to them that is negative, it's never their fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And so, but again, because I am an empath, and so, which is a whole nother situation, but did not even realize that about myself. And I have been my entire life. So I only look for the good in people, no matter what it is. No matter how negative the situation is, I'm the one that's going to say, okay, all right, but it could be worse. It could always be worse. What's the silver lining? And so that's who I am. And so every story that he told, I was the one saying, okay, so how do we fix this? How do I help you? How do we get through this? Because I'm a cheerleader. That's who I am. And so I was team him. And the narcissism is so much different from arrogance, because it's as if the energy is spent on how can I control, manipulate, and how can I win by any means necessary. And I can remember I used to say, you do realize we're on the same team. We're not in competition with one another, but I just did not recognize it for a very, very long time.
Well, this is really insightful and educational, because and that's what we want to share with others that may be facing the same thing. We're going to take a station break. Okay. And when we come back, I want to talk further about the process that you went through, and when did you say, okay, I was Catholic upbringing, but time is the time.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
Every story has a hidden element that is not often shared. Hidden Stories, Healed Now, with host Vicki Wright Hamilton, seeks to share the hidden gems in real-life experiences. Our guests are ordinary people sharing their stories of overcoming insurmountable odds while providing hope and inspiration.
Welcome back. We all face challenges within our lives, and today we're talking about what it means to understand narcissism, what it means to understand when somebody is arrogant and the differences, and what it means about your background. When two people come together, how they were raised, what they were taught, their belief systems, and how they move forward. So in understanding that and making that happen, we have Dr. Adrienne, who is sharing her story. And I hope that anyone out there who is feeling this, that it brings you a little bit of joy to know you are not alone, but brings you even more hope that there are solutions. So, Dr. Adrienne, one of the things I wanted to continue on, as you were talking before, and you said that, through your background, your faith, and we all know how strong faith can be. And we know that when we're talking to those that we love, that we respect, that we really want to take that to heed. But at some point, something changed.
Yeah.
What was it that made you say, I understand, but I have to?
Well, so I want to back up because a lot of times I encounter individuals who say, I didn't know. I didn't see red flags. And so what I often tell people is that if you really go back and you think about what you were experiencing, there probably were some signs and signals. And so, and I'm somebody that, it's not my goal to have a conversation where I am throwing my ex under the bus, because one thing about it is I took responsibility for who I was, because my self-esteem was suffering. That was the only thing that allowed me to stay in a situation where I knew it was toxic and I just didn't know how to get out for such a long time. But when we started dating, and I had to think about this. First of all, we were friends. And so we were friends, and there were conversations he would have with me. And I remember one semester in particular, something had transpired, and he was dealing with 3 females at the same time. And so, which a lot of, people do in college, and, you free-spirited, you doing whatever, but that was not the belief system that I came from. But again, you bring who you are into the situation without having a conversation with the other person about who it is that they are and what it is that they believe. And so when I thought about it, and I said, well, how did we even get together anyway, And I said, I got to be real. This was not a fairy tale. This was a night of drinking and playing cards, and we ended up back at his apartment having sex. And that's just real. But in my mind, if you have sex, you're together. You're a couple. I didn't realize that in his mind, having sex was not a commitment. But we go through the process. We're together. We're a couple. His behaviors are the same. They did not change. But in my mind, I thought that once you are together, once you are a couple, you are a couple. So again, I was very sheltered growing up. I didn't date until I was 17 years old. My father was very, very strict. And so my view of the world was very naive. And I just have to be honest about that. There are still a lot of things that even as an adult, I'm like, wow, people do that? This is what people doing? And so, we go through this courtship, and there are behaviors that were present that I think in my immaturity, I just didn't know how to address them. And again, because of my upbringing, I'm thinking, okay, well, once you get married and once you do all of these things, then things change. And so I remember we were dating and had talked around the subject of marriage. And I went home one weekend to Tuskegee. And so I'm in my mother's kitchen washing dishes and listening to Gladys Knight. I'll never forget it, If I Were Your Woman. And I'm in there washing dishes and I'm just singing. And so my mother was like, whose son are you singing about in here? So I told her all about him and everything. And she said, I'm going to say this to you. Who want the cow when they can have the milk for free? And so at that point, my Catholic upbringing came rushing back. And I was like, oh my God. And I went back to him and I said, I can't have premarital sex anymore. And he was like, what do you mean? We've been having premarital sex. And I said, I understand, but this is not how I was raised, and da-da-da-da-da. And so he said, well, we're already talking about getting married. And so in my mind, you want to marry me because you want to be with me, not because you want to have sex. And so again, our foundation, like the foundation of a lot of couples, it was raggedy. It was very raggedy because it was built on conversations that had not been had. It was built on a lot of assumptions that were made. And so we go through this process. And so like I tell a lot of my clients, we have what I call healthy, unhealthy distractions. There are healthy things going on in your life: getting married, graduating college, having kids, buying houses, getting promotions. But the unhealthy part is it prevents you from dealing with the toxic behaviors that are going on inside of your relationship. And so we had a lot of healthy things that were going on, but I was ignoring some of the glaring, huge things that were damaging me and probably damaging our kids. Even though they were not aware, they saw me start to withdraw from him. They saw that the family dynamics were shifting from, these trips where we were all present to trips where it was me and my babies rolling out. And so, you go through the motion, you have all these things that were going on. He had a lot of behaviors that were toxic, but I think were directly related to his upbringing. And so I just did not realize at that time how significant how you are raised and the environment that you come from impacts who it is that you're becoming.
Absolutely.
And so again, as a therapist who works with people to become the best version of themselves, my attitude was always, well, he can always get better. He can always become a better version of himself. And that was always my prayer for him. And so I was always hoping and praying that, okay, today will be the day when he will say, my behavior has to change. And that this is what fatherhood looks like. And this is what being a husband looks like. But those were things that he did not have an example of. And so one day, it just got to the point where I said, okay, I'm leaving the city we were living in, had been living in Macon, Georgia for 16 years, which is a very small community. We were very well known, and his behaviors were very egregious. And I didn't want it to touch my babies. I was like, they're getting older, because at that point I had one in high school, middle school, elementary, and pre-K. That was a rough year. But I remember saying, it's time for a new environment, because he has been so out of control that my kids are old enough to understand some of the gossip that's going around in the city. And I just don't want them to have to deal with it. And so I said, I'm taking them and I'm moving to Atlanta. If you're coming, these are the conditions. Because at that point, I wasn't ready to let go of my marriage. I think we were coming up on, 18 years or so. And I wasn't ready to let it go. And so we moved to Atlanta and the behaviors got worse. Yeah.
Let's take a station break. And when we come back, I'd love to hear the ending of that, of how things happen. And then I'd love for you to give the audience 2 tips of advice before we see if we have a question or a comment from the audience. We'll be right back.
Every story has a hidden element that is not often shared. Hidden Stories, Healed Now, with host Vicki Wright Hamilton, seeks to share the hidden gems in real-life experiences. Our guests are ordinary people sharing their stories of overcoming insurmountable odds while providing hope and inspiration.
Welcome back. This has been very enlightening, and it's been very educational to really understand the power of relationships and our upbringing and what happens. So after you all got to Atlanta and things got worse, what happened?
So we ended up going through an unlawful foreclosure on a home. And so piece that I left out is that for 30 years, I worked 3 jobs. And so, I did not realize. So when we talk about narcissism and manipulation, there's a lot of dishonesty that goes on. And so I found out through the course of the divorce, just how many lies he had told to my family, to our friends. He had people believing that I'm out here shopping and going on girls' trips. And, and I kept saying, at the end, I was like, who works 3 jobs to do those things? I was working to keep the lights on, to make sure that children could go to college and, and have the things that they needed. But as a part of the manipulation and control, narcissists want to appear a certain way. So they always want to appear as if they are the saviors. They always want to appear as if they are doing everything that they can to make things work, to make things go. And so that was just a part of the web of deception. And so, we move here. I'm making more money than I've ever made, and with fewer responsibilities because I was no longer an assistant principal. I had gone back into counseling in the school system, but I had my private practice. I'm writing grants. So it was easy for me to work 3 jobs. People always say, you made it look so easy. And that's because I just believe, I call it grace under fire, because I have a strong faith. And so I kept saying that, God, I know that you can change him into whoever it is he's supposed to be. And that was just my belief. But things continued to spiral out of control to the point where, and he was an attorney. And so I started to feel as if he was hiding money because he certainly was not bringing it home. And it was like the more I worked, the more that he expected me to work. And so it started to get overwhelming. And so I realized that for years I had been going to work, winning awards, just all sorts of things. And then I would come home and I was balled up in a knot crying. After I put my children to bed, we did the routine homework because nobody knew what I was experiencing because, again, I did not understand it. I didn't recognize it. And so after we ended up losing our home and it was an unlawful foreclosure, we were homeless. My children were farmed out. My oldest had just finished Morehouse. And, I had one in Morehouse coming out, one at Spelman, one headed to Miles College, and then my baby would have been headed to middle school. And so it was, we had all these cars on the insurance. It was a lot. It was overwhelming financially. And so I'll never forget it. August 25th, 2013, we had gotten into a new house, which was twice the size of our other house. It was half the cost of our other house. And so I said, God is providing us an opportunity for a clean slate. And so I said to him, I need your help. I need your help. And so we had been in the house for, a little over a year. His behavior had not changed. And so August 25th, 2013, I was crying and I said to him, there are days I don't have lunch money. Because when you imagine 4 kids and just what it takes to maintain the family, from food and clothing and haircuts and activities and just regular stuff, it was expensive. And so I said, there are times I don't have lunch money. And so I said, I need your help. I need your help. If you want to be in private practice, fine, but you got to help me. Go and stack the shelves at Walmart. I don't care what you do, but I need your help. And I always say that for people who don't believe in God, I don't know how they function, because I was standing in the bedroom. He was sitting in the bed, flipping the TV as if I wasn't talking to him. And so the bathroom was to my right. And we have these cabinets that are like 20 feet high because the ceilings are very high. The cabinet was just standing open and it was his side. A box fell from the very top. A leather box, money went everywhere. I knew in that moment that was God, because I had been asking for a sign, and every time God would show me a sign, I kept going back. I would never leave. I kept praying and staying. That was so undeniable for me that I knew that in that moment, and when that money went everywhere, he jumped out of the bed and he was scooping it up and he said, this is little money. This is little money. And I said, do you understand that I said there are days I can't eat because I don't have lunch money? And I said, any man who would allow his wife to suffer like this is not somebody I want to call my husband. I want a divorce. That was the day I said that word. He came back to me 2 days later and he said, you're going to have to pay me child support and alimony. And in my depression, I could not imagine, how will I work a 4th job? How will I do that? And I've had people say, well, why didn't you go and talk to an attorney? And it's because when you talk about depression and people who function in depression, it's almost like being a robot. Yes. I knew how to work. I knew how to raise my kids. I knew how to help my children be successful. I didn't know how to focus on my own needs because I had never done that.
That's right.
And so I stayed for 5 years because my baby was 13 years old. And I said, I got to stay until he's 18. I moved into the basement And I stayed for 5 years. And so our children at that point knew something was different.
Yes.
But he would tell them, I moved into the basement because he snores. I am not the type of person that's going to have those discussions with my children, because even though I had young adults, it was not their responsibility to shoulder the burdens of my relationship. And so I continued to work. I continued to press forward. And when January 11th, 2018 came along, I filed for divorce. My baby had turned 18 that previous September, and he was going to graduate that May. And I knew that it was time for me to get out.
You know, what a powerful story, and you know, the power of taking faith to the utmost.
Yeah.
Let's see if we have a question or a comment from the audience.
Hi, your story truly resonated with me because I've gone a similar path. And knowing about high functioning depression, what advice would you give someone, a woman who wants to get out of a situation like that and doesn't know how? What's the first step? Because it can be very debilitating, almost like you're in paralysis and not knowing what to do, feeling completely stuck. What advice would you give to get out of that situation? And it could be a man that's, you know, in that situation as well.
Absolutely. I think that the first thing that I would say is that you got to trust your instinct. So, you know, I didn't talk about the fact that I called the wedding off. I missed that part, you know. I called the wedding off because I got some information, and so, but still went through with it because of my parents' reputation, my grandparents' reputation. But everything in my gut said, don't do this. This is not where you're supposed to go. And I think a lot of times we ignore our instinct. We have gut feelings for a reason. It's there to help protect us. And so we have to learn to trust ourselves more than we trust the words of everybody else. So that would be the first thing that I would say. And then the next thing I would say is go and talk to a professional. Because when we talk to our friends and family members, they're going to give us advice based on who they are, not based on who we are. And so when you go and you talk to a professional who can be objective and non-judgmental, then you are more likely to get advice and recommendations that are going to work in your favor.
Thank you so much. This has been so enlightening. And you know, just as we say, we all experience things and just don't know where to go. And I want to thank you for sharing your journey.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for giving hope to our audience and letting them know you're not alone and you can overcome too.
Absolutely.
So would you all join me in thanking Dr. Adrienne for being with us today? Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you all for joining us on another episode of Hidden Stories Healed Now, where we let those hidden stories out so that we can have strength